The room fell silent the moment the glass bowl tipped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The laughter that had filled the golden-lit ballroom froze midair, like it, too, had been caught in shock. Then the liquid cascaded, cold, sparkling, humiliating, over the bowed head of a pregnant woman who didn't even try to shield herself. And in that single, cruel second, everything changed. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of those who endure in silence, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of compassion, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone push too far? Her name was Elena, and she had learned long ago how to endure humiliation without making a sound. The party had been her husband's idea. Victor loved grand gestures, but only when they reflected well on him. The chandeliers above sparkled like frozen stars. The music hummed with elegance, and his guests, laughed in tailored suits and shimmering gowns. Elena stood among them like a misplaced memory, her soft beige dress clinging to her rounded belly, her hands instinctively resting over the life growing inside her. She had almost not come, but Victor insisted. He had smiled when he said it, that charming practice smile that once made her feel chosen. Now it felt like a warning she had learned too late to understand. He told her it would be good for her, that people needed to see them together, that appearances mattered. Appearances always mattered to Victor. What didn't matter was how she felt when the whispers started the moment she entered the room. The sideways glances, the subtle smirks, the way conversations dipped just slightly as she passed. She wasn't blind. She knew what they saw, a woman who no longer fit the image Victor had built for himself. She was softer now, slower, carrying not just a child but months of quiet neglect. Victor had stopped touching her long before the baby came. At first, it was subtle. A missed kiss, a distracted nod. Then came the distance, growing like a wall between them, brick by brick. By the time she realized she was alone in her marriage, she was already carrying his child. And now she stood in a room full of strangers who judged her without knowing the story. The moment of humiliation didn't come suddenly. It built like a storm no one else could hear. Victor had been drinking. He laughed louder than usual, spoke sharper, his charm turning brittle at the edges. He moved through the crowd like a king surveying his court, basking in admiration that felt increasingly hollow. And then someone made a comment. It was light, almost playful, about how quickly life had changed for him, about settling down, about responsibilities. Victor laughed, but something in his eyes darkened. He turned to Elena, and instead of pride, instead of warmth, there was irritation, resentment. She felt it before he spoke. He began with a joke, but it wasn't funny. It cut too close, too sharp. He spoke about how unexpected things happen, how life doesn't always go as planned. The crowd chuckled politely, unsure. Elena stood still, her fingers tightening slightly over her belly. Then came the final blow. He gestured toward her, his voice louder now, careless. He said something about mistakes, about burdens, about how not everything that looks perfect truly is. The room shifted, and then, as if to seal the moment, the woman in the red dress, someone Elena barely knew, stepped forward with a bright smile and a cruel idea masked as humor. She lifted the glass bowl from the table, laughing as if this were all a harmless joke. Before Elena could react, the liquid poured, cold, heavy, unforgiving. It soaked through her hair, her dress, her dignity, and still she didn't cry. She lowered her head, not out of shame, but out of instinct. Protect the baby, protect what mattered. Around her, the room fractured. Some gasped, some turned away, some raised their phones. Victor didn't stop it. That was the part that hurt the most. He didn't step forward, didn't defend her, didn't even look ashamed. He just stood there, watching. But fate doesn't always wait for justice. Sometimes it arrives uninvited. The doors at the far end of the hall opened with a force that cut through the murmurs. 3 men stepped in. They didn't belong to the glittering world of that party, yet somehow they commanded more presence than anyone else in the room. Their suits were simple but flawless, their expressions unreadable, their movements precise, and their eyes found Elena instantly. The air shifted. People moved aside without being asked. Victor frowned, confusion flickering across his face as the men approached. He didn't recognize them, but something about them made even him uneasy. Elena, still drenched, still trembling, slowly lifted her head. For the first time that night, her eyes filled with something other than quiet endurance. Recognition. The eldest of the three reached her first. He didn't speak. He simply took off his jacket and gently placed it around her shoulders, shielding her from the stares, from the cold, from the cruelty that had soaked into her skin. The second brother stepped closer, his jaw tightening as he took in the scene. The third turned his gaze to Victor. And that was when the room truly fell silent. Because power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it stands still and lets others realize far too late what they've done. Victor straightened, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. So he asked who they were, his tone edged with irritation rather than concern. No one answered immediately. Instead, the eldest brother finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced even the music. He said Elena's name, not like a question, like a promise. And then he looked at Victor in a way that stripped away every ounce of false confidence the man had built around himself. What Victor didn't know, what he had never cared to ask, was that Elena had come from a world far beyond his own. She had never flaunted it, never used it, never even mentioned it. For it is, because she believed in love, because she thought she had found something real. Her brothers, however, had never trusted Victor, and now they didn't need explanations. They had seen enough. The second brother stepped forward, his voice sharper now, cutting through the air like glass. He spoke not with anger, but with clarity, the kind that leaves no room for excuses. He described exactly what they had walked into, what everyone in that room had witnessed, what Victor had allowed. Victor tried to laugh it off, to turn it into a misunderstanding, to claim it was all in good fun. But no one laughed this time. Because the balance had shifted, the third brother moved closer, his presence alone enough to make Victor take a step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply told Victor that actions have consequences. And for the first time that night, Victor looked uncertain. Elena stood between them, wrapped in warmth that felt unfamiliar after so long. She hadn't realized how cold she had been until that moment. Her brothers didn't ask if she was okay. They already knew. Instead, they waited. Because the next step was hers, and that was something Victor had never given her. The choice. The room held its breath as Elena slowly lifted her gaze. She looked at Victor, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with something far more powerful, clarity. The kind that comes when a person finally sees the truth they've been avoiding. She realized in that moment that she had been shrinking herself to fit into a life that was never built for her. That she had been holding on to a version of love that no longer existed. And that her child deserved more. Without a word, she took a step back, away from Victor, toward her brothers. It was a small movement, but it changed everything. Victor tried to speak, to reach for her, but something in her expression stopped him. For the first time, he understood that he had lost control of the situation, and more importantly, he had lost her. The brothers didn't celebrate. They didn't escalate. They simply stood with her. Because sometimes the greatest act of strength isn't revenge, it's walking away. As they turned to leave, the room remained frozen, every guest silently witnessing the unraveling of a man who had mistaken power for worth. Elena didn't look back, not once, because she didn't need to. She already knew what she was leaving behind and what she was stepping into. Before we reach the end, if this story is touching your heart, take a moment to like, share, and let others feel this message too. And I have a special request. Comment below with the word "a strength of" if you believe no one deserves to be humiliated for simply existing. Because Ina's story didn't end that night. It began. In the days that followed, the world learned the truth Victor had tried to ignore. The quiet woman he had humiliated was the sister of men whose names carried influence far beyond boardrooms and headlines. But that wasn't what mattered to Elena. What mattered was that she found herself again. She rebuilt her life not through wealth, but through dignity. She prepared for her child with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. And surrounded by people who valued her, not for appearances, but for who she was, she began to heal. Victor, on the other hand, faced the consequences of a moment he couldn't undo. Because humiliation leaves marks, not just on the person who suffers it, but on the one who causes it. And in the end, Elena didn't need revenge. She had something far greater, freedom, and a future where kindness, respect, and love would no longer be optional, but essential. If this story moved you, don't forget to engage with the video, share your thoughts, and spread this message. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind the world what truly matters. The silence that followed Elena's departure lingered long after the doors closed behind her. It wasn't the kind of silence that fades quickly. It settled into the walls, into the polished floors, into the uneasy hearts of everyone who had witnessed what happened. Conversations didn't resume the same way. Laughter didn't sound as light. Even the music, when it finally returned, felt hollow, like a performance no one truly believed in anymore. Victor stood in the center of it all, but for the first time in years, he wasn't the one in control. He tried to recover. At first, it was subtle, a forced chuckle, a dismissive wave of his hand. He muttered something about overreactions, about family drama, about how people love to exaggerate things. But his voice lacked the authority it once carried, and the people around him noticed. Ooh. Because they had seen something real. And once reality cracks through illusion, it's impossible to ignore. One by one, guests began to leave. Some offered polite nods, others avoided eye contact entirely. A few whispered among themselves, their voices low but sharp enough to carry meaning. No one wanted to be associated with what had just happened, not now that the truth had revealed itself. Victor felt it slipping. His image, his reputation, his carefully constructed world, and worst of all, his certainty. For the first time, doubt crept in, but it didn't come as regret, not yet. It came as anger. He blamed Elena. He told himself she had embarrassed him, that she had made him look small in front of everyone. He replayed the moment in his mind, twisting it, reshaping it until he was no longer the villain, until he could breathe without facing the weight of what he had done. But deep down, beneath all the noise in his head, there was something else, a quiet, persistent realization. He had lost her, not just physically, completely. Elena didn't speak during the drive. She sat in the back seat, wrapped in her brother's jacket, her damp hair clinging softly to her shoulders. The city lights blurred past the window, but she didn't see them. Her mind was somewhere between the past she had just left behind and the future she hadn't yet learned to imagine. Her eldest brother drove in silence, his expression calm but focused. The second brother sat beside her, occasionally glancing her way, not to ask questions, but to make sure she didn't feel alone. The youngest kept his gaze forward, his jaw still tense, the anger he felt controlled, but not gone. None of them pushed her to speak, because they knew healing doesn't begin with words, it begins with space. When they finally arrived, it wasn't a grand mansion or a display of wealth that greeted her. It was something far more meaningful. Home. A place untouched by pretense. A place where she didn't have to prove anything. As she stepped inside, something in her shifted. The weight she had been carrying, months, maybe years of quiet endurance, didn't disappear all at once. But it loosened. Just enough for her to breathe differently. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel watched. She didn't feel judged. She didn't feel small. And that alone was enough to bring tears to her eyes. She hadn't cried at the party, but here, in the safety of people who loved her without condition, she finally did. The days that followed were not dramatic. There were no grand confrontations, no immediate resolutions, just slow, steady change. Elena spent mornings sitting by the window, her hands resting over her belly, feeling the gentle movements of the life inside her. Each small kick reminded her of something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never truly had been. She began to reflect, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She thought about the early days with Victor, about the way he had once made her feel seen, chosen. She realized now that what she had mistaken for love had always been conditional, dependent on how well she fit into his world. And when she changed, when life changed, when responsibility replaced perfection, so did he. That realization hurt, but it also freed her. Because it meant the failure wasn't hers to carry. Her brothers remained close, but they didn't overwhelm her. They supported her in quiet ways, making sure she ate, making sure she rested, making sure she knew she had options, real options, not the kind Victor had given her. They helped her reconnect with parts of herself she had slowly abandoned. Her interests, her confidence, her voice. At first it felt unfamiliar. Then it felt right. Victor, meanwhile, tried to reach her. At first it was messages, short, controlled, carefully worded. He asked where she was. He said they needed to talk. He insisted things had been misunderstood. When she didn't respond, the messages changed. They became longer, more urgent. He apologized, but even then there was something missing. His words felt like they were meant to fix a situation, not a relationship. He still didn't fully understand. And Elena knew it. That's why she didn't reply, because for the first time, she wasn't reacting, she was choosing. Weeks passed. The story spread quietly, then loudly, not through scandal, but through truth. People talked about what they had seen, about the woman who had endured humiliation without breaking, about the moment everything shifted. Victor's reputation didn't collapse overnight, but it cracked. And cracks, once formed, don't disappear easily. Opportunities became limited, invitations became fewer. The same people who once admired him now kept their distance, not because of Elena's brothers, but because of him, because they had seen who he really was. One afternoon, Elena finally made a decision. She didn't announce it dramatically. She didn't gather everyone for a conversation. She simply chose her future. She met with a lawyer, quietly and confidently, and began the process of separating her life from Victor's. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about peace, and she was ready for it. Months later, everything changed again. But this time, it was something beautiful. The day her child was born was nothing like the night of that party. There were no crowds, no judgment, no performance, just warmth. Her brothers were there waiting patiently, their usual strength softened by something deeper. When they finally held the baby, something unspoken passed between them, a promise to protect, to love, to be present in ways that truly mattered. Elena held her child close, her heart fuller than she had ever known it could be. And in that moment, she understood something powerful. She hadn't lost anything that night at the party. She had gained everything she truly needed. Victor heard about the birth. He didn't show up. Not because he didn't want to, but because, deep down, he knew he no longer had a place there. Time moved forward, as it always does. Elena built a life defined not by appearances, but by meaning. She found strength not in wealth, but in self-worth. And most importantly, she created an environment where her child would grow up knowing what respect, kindness, and love truly look like. She never spoke badly about Victor. She didn't need to. Some stories explain themselves, and some lessons don't need to be repeated to be understood. If this continuation touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and let this story reach someone who might need it today. And before you go, I have a special request. Comment the word of freedom if you believe everyone deserves a life where they are valued, respected, and truly seen. Because in the end, Elena's story isn't about revenge. It's about rediscovery. It's about walking away from what breaks you and finding the courage to choose what heals you. And sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you finally begin again.